is done. We're going to get started. And for this, I have prepared some remarks to get us going. I think this mic is also working. Yes. All right. I wrote this and I wanted to make sure I read from it because I think it's a rare and remarkable convergence to have this alignment of our NIH leadership here with us today. And I think that this is the specific group of leaders bring the architecture of the infrastructure. They're the guardians of the data, and they're the visionaries of the application of artificial intelligence across the entire spectrum of human health. So I would like for you to join me in welcoming the NIH perspective on the future of AI, and I'll introduce our panelists as they make their way up to the table out here, please. And so first, Michael Chiang. Dr. Chiang brings the perspective of a clinical trailblazer. He sees AI through the lens of medical imaging and informatics, where the eye serves as a vital, non-invasive window into synthetic health. Dr. Stephen Sherry is the acting director of the National Library of Medicine, and he's the steward of the world's largest collection of biomedical information, and he provides a perspective on the infrastructure backbone and ensures the vast library of human knowledge is computable, accessible, and ready for machines. Valentina Di Francesco is the Chief Data Science Strategist and Director of Genomic Data Science at NHGRI. She represents the foundational of the code of life. And she brings a strategic focus on how we ensure genomic data is not only massive in scale, but ethical in origin and fair in its implementation. David Shurtleff. Dr. Shurtleff brings the essential, the perspective of the whole person, focusing on the integration of multimodal data from behavioral patterns to physiological signals, and this defines wellness and health beyond traditional clinical silos. Dr. Bruce Tromberg, director of NIBIB, represents this bridge between engineering and medicine, and he focuses on the physical-digital interface, how bioengineering and rapid diagnostic technologies generate this high-fidelity data that feeds the AI engine. Last but not least, Dr. Brower. Brad Brower is the acting Chief AI Officer at the NIH and the Chief AI and Data Science Officer for NIBIB. And he orchestrates this wide strategy and brings a perspective of governance and policy that ensures that the future of AI at NIH is as responsible and safe as it is transformative. I'd like for all of you to welcome them, and so let's give them a round of applause. So for all of you leaders here, the stars have aligned and the stage is yours now. And we're honored to have you here to share your vision. To our audience, Yulia and I are going to ask questions first. We collected these questions ahead of time, share them with you. These came from abroad, from all across the consortium. And then as we look into, as we start looking into the future with these questions, I'd like for the audience to start preparing yours. And this is your opportunity to engage with the minds that are shaping the next era of medicine. And so, Christian, could you please help me make sure that we bring Dr. Sherry on the screen? Unfortunately, Dr. Sherry wasn't able to join us here in person, but he is on Zoom. There we go. Thank you. I think we have him now. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to sit down and do this panel from the chair. Sorry. Thank you so much for being here with us today. As you know, the theme of our 2 days for all hands is this, making sure that we can draw the wisdom out of the data that we have been generating. And so I would like to ask for you to share with us some of your thoughts on, from your perspective, what are some of the specific metrics or the specific milestones that would let you see that we've achieved this, that we've successfully moved beyond generating all of these data and actually starting to achieve the wisdom part? And you can choose whoever wants to share this first.
I'll start probably by stating the obvious. So you obviously are completing your first phase of the program, and a major goal of this program is to generate resources that come in different shapes and forms: data, best practices, standards, you name it. So you have several goals. You are on a good track to achieve all of them, right? But basically, you're generating resources. NHGRI is in the same field. We're generating lots of resources that we're making available to genomic researchers and researchers across the NIH. So how do we define success? Is uptake, right? Give yourself time in ourselves time to basically demonstrate the value, provide evidence that these resources are being utilized, they are being consumed for AI development purposes, not only for AI development purposes, but also for other types of algorithms and new technologies that may be used for the future. Are those standards up to, to the expectations and the needs of the community? Are the best practices realistic and feasible, and all this kind of stuff? So you're producing this massive amount of very valuable data. Let's move on to the next phase and demonstrate that indeed this is valuable.
Thank you.
I'll jump in very quickly. First, Moni, thank you for the long walk. That was fantastic. I just want to say the quiet part out loud. All of that takes time, and we are aware of that. We do not expect you to be able to demonstrate uptake immediately just as the data is released. It's going to take time to demonstrate community adoption, and it's going to take effort on behalf of the community beyond Bridge2AI to adopt and demonstrate the utility of the best practices. And it's going to take effort on behalf of NIH and other programs that we're dealing with to help push those best practices to ensure that they're adopted beyond Bridge2AI. So I want to echo everything Valentina just said, and also just point out, we appreciate this takes time to demonstrate that value. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add by saying that, first of all, it feels like you're building the plane as it's flying. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this over the last several years. So it's an amazing accomplishment. So congratulations. And I want to just emphasize too, that I think this is a partnership between not only the research community, but the NIH. You can see the NIH staff here who have been with you day in and day out, hand in hand, as we've built this plane together, so to speak, moving forward. And I think that'll continue into the future. I think the big issue that we've all talked about and it's been coming up often is data sustainability, open access, sharing of data, and what that means to the community and moving the field forward. So I look forward to further discussions and working with this community on those critical points and issues.
I think this is linear. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think focusing on the word wisdom, there's an enormous amount of wisdom generated in accomplishing what the original intent was, which was to show the world that there are databases that can be created that are examples of AI-ready data, and addressing the question of what is AI-ready. I mean, a lot of us talked about that 4 or 5 years ago and really didn't have quite an answer. So we have 4 incredible data sets that are demonstrating to the world AI-ready data. So that's an enormous piece of wisdom there. And also, kind of overcoming the odds of bringing people and institutions together. So we can't brush that aside. And there is an enormous amount of wisdom demonstrated in pulling, like you guys all figured that out. And we have these 4 data sets, and there are already discoveries coming from these data sets. So phase 1 itself has demonstrated an enormous amount of wisdom, and we just have fantastic foundation for moving to the next level.
Yeah, I'm gonna partly repeat or just double down on what some of the other crew said here, which is number 1, there's a ton of wisdom in this room. And in some ways, this is sort of a Jedi Council of this field in the U.S. And I think this is unprecedented. In a lot of ways, the scope and the breadth of data that we've collected here, and the fact that we're using it for sharing. So that's and another thing I would say, just in responding to that in terms of wisdom, is that one thing that I've been thinking a lot is that the academic unit of currency that is the individual paper. Yet I think that when we really, like for those of us, well, really in principle for all of us here in this room, but for those of us sitting up here on the podium, what we're trying to do is that, we see when we win that we discover things that advance the field, like things that are broadly true and that, we can make new drugs from or, one day treat cures from. And that doesn't come one paper at a time. That comes by synthesizing, different papers and often different people looking at the same thing together from different perspectives. And I think that these data sets give us an opportunity to do that and sort of in some ways rethink the way that the scientific process works and how the knowledge discovery process works. And there's a whole lot involved in that. That's how do you synthesize knowledge? How do you incentivize people to do similar aspects of the similar project and sort of in some ways reproduce them? So I wanted to point that out. And one thing that I'm personally excited about where this could lead us.
Dr. Sherry?
Yeah, so I think these are great remarks, and to kind of build on what Dr. Chiang was saying and some of the earlier ones about time and the scope of work remaining. From NLM's perspective, wisdom means that the AI outputs coming out of this project are connected to the biomedical knowledge ecosystem. Not just the predictions, but findings that can be situated in the published literature that can be linked to clinical guidelines and traced back to evidence. So maybe, a concrete milestone of how we know that we're getting there is when Bridge2AI derived insights automatically surfaces in a clinical decision support tool that a community clinician actually uses. And that tool cites its provenance all the way back to the data and the evidence in Bridge2AI. So wisdom, I think, also means that the research record reflects AI-generated findings, the things that are going to come out of research, and that PubMed and other similar knowledge infrastructures can index, contextualize, and maybe make those findings discoverable and reproducible, just like in papers, the way Dr. Chiang was saying. And so the shift from data to wisdom, it's going to require knowledge curation infrastructure and not just compute. And that infrastructure is the thing that takes time to build, and the standards need to be developed. NLM is a partner, other institutes here are a partner in that. And I think that's one of the great challenges that AI is facing, a really open playbook on what does that infrastructure require, not just on the compute side, but on that curation and integration, because that's a never-ending task as we try to understand how to surface bias, reproducibility, and all of the other principles of best practice this program's tried to model. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Sherry. It's almost like I asked you to set up the next question. So you're leaders from across the NIH, and we are wondering how can we ensure that this wisdom that we're generating in, for instance, in genomic data from NHGRI perspective can be integrated with other wisdom like medical imaging, clinical informatics, things that are represented in NIBIB or NLM. And how is the NIH ensuring that this wisdom can be integrated across and create this truly holistic, multimodal view of the human health? I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of that perspective.
I'll jump in first. Thanks. What a fantastic question. So I've been at the National Institutes of Health for about 3 years. And one of my first questions was, why do so many of these programs exist in a silo, right? How do we ensure that the outputs of programs like Bridge2AI extend beyond Bridge2AI? So what I would say is, I think generally through programs like the Common Fund, through many, got multiple cross NIH coordinating groups now, really trying to be aware of this and track, and hey, our program is developing. Let's make sure that gets incorporated into this other program. I'm really proud to say that Bridge2AI gets brought up a lot in non-Bridge2AI meetings for that very reason. Did you know Bridge2AI is building? Check out this LC paper that just came out. This is fantastic. Let's make sure we're thinking about this as we're moving forward. So I would say there is that base level of communication across groups within NIH to ensure that happens. I would also say that it's not enough. So as a data person, I do think there's work to be done in building systems that help us uncover and discover these kinds of connections more automatically. There was a beautiful paper on the talent network knowledge graph that came out of C4AI. Fantastic. I think more of that kind of work needs to happen within NIH and without to help us understand how to make those links. I'm sure the rest of the panelists would agree. NIH is really big. It's hard to uncover and surface all of those things all of the time. So I do think there's an aspect, and I'm sure Steve would agree with this as well, of understanding what are those knowledge curation systems that we need to have in place around just the programs that we fund to ensure that those translations can happen at scale. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Sherry.
Yes, I think Brad's right on point. There's a need for a semantic glue in this ecosystem, and that genomic findings out of NHGRI, image data out of NIBIB, they can only be integrated at scale if they share common clinical informatics backbones, things like standardized terminologies, ontologies, and interoperability frameworks. And I think we have examples of this, some of the stuff that NIH invests in, and the library does, UMLS, RxNorm for drugs, SNOMED, licensing, Medline Plus are kind of standards repositories that provide concept IDs and stabilizing descriptions to go into these knowledge structures, whether they're knowledge graphs or something, less rigorous. The controlled vocabularies allow genomic variants and radiology reports to kind of be linked to the same patient concepts, right? So I think there's a call to action here and to have the groups work together to ensure that the semantic layer is built in from the start and not just a retrofit at the end. And I think Bridge2AI models that as you're trying to actually create these kind of cross-system integrations. And so wherever we can use existing standards and terminologies, that's to the win. And where they're needed, and that kind of gap analysis is so important right now, that's a place where we could, NIH could do investments in convening functions or whatever we have to do in the standards community to make sure that the semantic framework is expressive enough for all of the kinds of information that's being pulled into AI systems. Over.
Yeah, and I think from a conceptual perspective, NCCIH, as you know, champions whole person health research, which is now being embraced across the NIH. And this will require all the things that Steve just mentioned and more, bringing that all into an AI platform that really helps us think about the whole person, not just individual organs or systems, but how they interact, the complexity of that interaction, where, of course, this is where AI will shine, right? It will take those data and create connections and understanding that we can't even imagine. So keeping that perspective in mind, I think will help drive where the technology needs to go and the types of data we need to collect in order to fill that sort of conceptual model of whole person health.
So, this is a kind of a simple answer to the question. So I think I am the only person left in the room in 2019 when we had the whiteboard in Jim Anderson's office drawing up the concept for Bridge2AI, trying to sort of channel the advisory council to the director's recommendations and what we thought was going to happen. And so fast forward to now, look at the representation of IC directors, all the stakeholders in this. Sometimes the NIH is behind the community, sometimes the NIH is ahead of the community, kind of conceptually. I think, in this moment, the NIH is actually ahead of the community. From the very, very beginning, we thought that imaging and genomic and clinical and like all this data could be integrated and people could really make big discoveries and change outcomes for patients. And that was in the original whiteboard drawing. And we preserve that spirit today. All of the program officers are 100% on board with this. They're all working together. So this is a program that is an incredible example of that ambition that you expressed and the hope that we can come together as a community and we can send out the demand signal and you can respond. And, so we're well on our way towards doing that.
Thank you.
I think that's the things I would add to, these are great comments, would be that, number one, a plug for Primed AI.
Yeah.
Coming out once we can get these NOFOs through. And because that's looking at many of these questions you asked about multimodal data. But the other thing, if I may share just an anecdote from when I was an academic, one of the grants that I had was called Clinical and Genetic Diagnosis of a Retinal Disease. And we collected a lot of images, and it turns out that, and so we thought, well, we'll get we can look at risk factors, make a diagnosis with things like AI. And what we found is that by taking a picture of the retina, we could get almost 100% accuracy in diagnosis. So we didn't need the genetic data. That was an interesting sort of point, one of these aha moments for me, that people ask questions that are relevant to what they do. In other words, as a doctor, you want to diagnose disease. And if you can diagnose it with just one piece of data, you don't need the other types of data. But we weren't asking those truly cross-cutting questions like what causes disease or what are the mechanistics of disease. And this was a truly multidisciplinary group that was doing this. And so that's a plug for how important I think it is to really get people around the room who can ask those cross-cutting questions. Because if you get doctors to ask questions, you're going to answer doctor questions. And so just sort of a plug for multidisciplinary teams in terms of synthesizing questions and discovering new knowledge.
Yeah, just adding to that, Mike, I mean, you see an image with some contrast to background, and a physician will say, is that the disease? Is that not the disease? Scientists will say, well, what is the origin, the cellular origin of that contrast? What's the molecular origin of the contrast? So the imaging community, I've done this in my career, everyone is obsessed with identifying what those contrast elements are, what the fundamental contributors are to the contrast, and perturbing the system to see if they change. So this is what all of you are doing, and I think it's a fabulous point that you're making with the question.
Cheers. Well, these advances in bringing these data types together, that are also conducting artificial intelligence analysis in them, is computationally tremendously costly. It's advancing AI is very expensive, and so this can present barriers for institutions that don't have this type of funds in order to be able to achieve it. And we're wondering if you could share a little bit about what kind of strategies NIH is trying to do to democratize access to like high computing systems, clouds, high performance computing systems and clouds, just to make sure that the wisdom is not saved for only those who have the money. Valentina.
Yeah, we have been leveraging cloud computing since we launched the ENVOL a few years ago. And we have been targeting enabling low resource institutions utilizing the tools, the resources, the data, the massive data, amount of data that is on the ENVOL platform. By far, obviously, the problems is related to cost of the cloud, inability to estimate cost. Cost overruns. Again, the graduate student that does not realize that some script has been running forever and it's not stopping and so on. So this is a major impediment for those type of resources of institutions if we want them to basically become competitive in a world that is actually dominated by the ability and skill set for using this high performance computing technologies and so on. So what I've been hearing constantly from applicants that need to write applications, from people that need to use the platform and so on, is give me tools to do good cost estimates. I need to run this tool. What is the memory that I need? What is the amount of nodes that I need, and so on. I think more work needs to be done on that. So the same is true, obviously, for AI model, AI tool development, and so on. The same story. If we want to really enable the new workforce to come up to speed with these new technologies, giving them tools, and also from the NIH point of view, incentivizing research in this area, right? Don't think of it as an afterthought, but it is actually, should be front and center for developing this new skill set that everybody needs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me just ask, how many in the room are actually actively calculating their token budget right now? There we go. No, absolutely. I think that ability to understand the economics of the new models that we're trying to develop are really important. I just want to very quickly make the pitch that I think partnerships with the outside community are part of how we can lean into this. So the National AI Research Resource, NIH has been an active partner with that. It's an NSF-led initiative, but through the NAIR pilot initiative, they do offer resources, both cloud resources and resources on Summit for high performance compute. I believe these resource offerings are still available. Please don't hold me to that. And we're also evaluating partnerships with the DOE on the Genesis mission. So if you're familiar with the Genesis mission concept, the idea here is to understand how we can accelerate the pace of science and technology innovation by 2x in 10 years, which is a pretty large goal. And the intent is to use AI, HPC, quantum to not just have cool applications of HPC and quantum, but to understand how can we accelerate the rate of innovation using those technologies. So NIH is very much leading into this. We're looking at what we're calling the biogenesis mission aspect here. So this concept of leaning into partnerships as part of this, I think is going to be really important. So I'd welcome all of you to participate in the National AI Research Resource as well.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Partnerships is key for all of us. I think partnerships across the NIH through initiatives like the Common Fund, which we're funded through now. As a small center at NIH, we look for, and some of our key professional schools are under-resourced for research. We look to partner with more resource-intense universities who have the facilities and research. So partnership is a key aspect to this, and I think that is the way forward. Open access to data, again, is another way to reduce cost and allow sharing and collaboration across multidisciplinary approaches and across institutes that may be under-resourced is another approach that we've thought about at NCCIH. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, and I want to answer kind of like part of that question from a technology point of view, kind of amplifying a bit what Brad said. So maybe I'm one of the few geezers in the room who developed technology over like a 35-year period. And the things that I built and bought, like nonlinear optical microscopes, ultra-sensitive and ultra-fast, CMOS and CCD detectors. And well, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, even sequencing the human genome, which would not have happened without lasers and photomultiplier tubes and, fluorescent probes. So all those things were insanely expensive to start with. I mean, you couldn't buy a femtosecond laser for less than, well, they wouldn't even give you the price. And you had to kind of negotiate that. But now, we have fiber lasers. We have lasers that the size of a grain of sand. And of course, software and computation is driven by both the hardware, which we see expanding incredibly, but it's easy to distribute algorithms. And so, the economic impact of these methods, whether they're foundational or you have to partner with industry, or like we do in academics, you put a center together for imaging or doing something unique and it's very expensive, and then everyone comes to that center. So we have some structures and precedents and cultures for that. And, what is it to do the full genome sequencing now? It's less than 3 billion. So anyway, I mean, I have some confidence that the accessibility and costs with the enormous investments that are being made are going to come down.
Yeah, I would just add, I really like the term partnership that I think Brad first brought up. When I was in academia, I mean, sometimes I would think of NIH as my nemesis or a barrier to what it was that I really wanted to do. And I just from the perspective of being here, I hope it's obvious that, we really do view ourselves as partners with people in the community who are doing the real work. And so that I think I really want to double down on. The other thing I'd say is that like a couple of years ago, I remember having a conversation with Lucilla when you mentioned the premise of this high performance computing as being really a gap in the, I hope I'm quoting you correctly. And so I completely agree that this is important. And I've thought about that quite a bit since those conversations. And I would just also say that I was in a meeting once with a group of faculty from Stanford who were pretty high end in terms of computation. They were saying that they don't have the power to compete with industry. And so in some ways, if those people feel like there's a need, it's sort of not a high resource, low resource thing. It's sort of all of academia in some ways. And so those are areas that I do see as avenues for future, partnership, I'll say.
Thank you. Dr. Sherry, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think NLM, maybe we would speak to the informatics side of the access gap. And I'm just thinking about what Valentina was saying at the beginning. When compute's available, small institutions may often lack data literacy, tooling, or interoperability infrastructure to use it effectively. So it's not just about the compute itself, but it's the enabling frameworks. So I was just going to do a shout out that NIH supports efforts like NCCIH, which is the NIH Cloud Platform Interoperability Program. And this is trying to ensure data access that's standardized so researchers aren't rebuilding pipelines from scratch, and having to do work at every institution that they can leverage. Just like Valentina mentioned, Anvil, there's many members of the NCCIH. So, if democratizing AI, it's not just about raw compute. I think we have a challenge to ensure that standards, documentation, and training lower the barrier to entry for institutions that don't have these large informatics teams. I think to have the effective partnerships, you still have to have the trained workforce on your own team that can interact with them. And so NLM invests in training too. And that's another growth area I'm hoping in our AI strategic plan we can lean into as an institute is AI-centered training.
Brilliant. Thank you. Partnerships and workforce development. And yes, thank you so much. I know that I could sit and enjoy the answers for another 2 hours, but I don't want to hug all the attention. And we have a lot more questions that I prepared that I'd like to talk about, right? Like there's the standards for teaming that our project has said, standards for ethical principles and the generation of the data. But I'd like to use these remaining 20 minutes to open the floor to our community to ask questions as well. And so if that's okay with you, I'll open the floor and ask you to come to the mics and share some of the questions that you have for our community. And so please, so Scott, and I see Eric, El Trey, thank you so much. So Scott, please.
Hi, Scott McGrath, UC Berkeley.
I don't think it's on.
I'll speak loud now. So I wanted to pull back and actually get your opinion on something that concerns me. And that's how do we take the discoveries and the findings that we were able to kind of build out of this and bring it to a public that has a very fraught feeling about AI? And how do we actually make it that we're able to punch it through? If we look back, we kind of felt that, okay, well, the knowledge and discoveries will kind of speak for themselves, but communities have built up that are resistant to that. And so I'd like just to kind of hear how you think we could work on that. Like, is there a specific communication style that we should collectively prepare for to say, like, this is a good tentpole for what it can do? Because there is a lot of bad with AI. The AI slop is kind of dominating the communication. So how do we move forward on that?
And if I may, with our panelists, may I kindly ask, perhaps we take 2 or 3 perspectives each time and then allow for the 5 questions that I see forming. Thank you so much. Who would like to answer to Scott first? Michael?
Yeah, Scott, I think that's a really important question. I'm barely old enough to remember as a physician when neurologists wanted to do their neural exam instead of look at a diagnosis from an imaging study, brain MRI or something. And I think there's always going to be that tension when you look at new technologies. I think to me, information dissemination is one of the keys to this. And what I see as one of the challenges is that the people who do AI are the nerds. And the people who practice medicine and who see patients are less nerdy. And
Some are still.
yeah.
There's neurologists.
Yeah, and so I actually think that's an enormous disconnect. And the people who are teaching medicine, aren't, the same people either. And so I see sort of, the nerds who are building these technologies, the doctors who are delivering care, and the leadership of those doctors and the people who are teaching this, I don't feel are on the same page with this. And I personally don't think it's quite as useful to have, just the nerds talking to everybody else about how great these technologies are. And I mean, to me, that's one gap that I've consistently seen. And I mean, just for what it's worth, I've tried to, we've had some conversations, you can imagine, with leadership within the medical, societies about addressing this. But if any of you have thoughts about this, I think this is actually super important, for exactly the reason you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe shine a light on a slightly tangential perspective. We have that in everything in science these days. And, you're looking at a group of people who are constantly asked that question about, virtually everything. And of course, AI itself is like now on the leading edge of driving that. And I'm picking on Steve. He really describes very beautifully how you can think about and trust the AI solution. I mean, those of us who have solved, inverse problems mathematically, we're worried a lot because it's a statistical technique that, can't always arrive at a true solution. But you can't explain it like that to the public. And so, we have to bring our game up in terms of communication and the traceability of the data. Professional societies, particularly in medicine and in radiology, have published lots of papers on how you as a clinician can help explain this AI-based algorithm to patients, and like how to communicate, how to trust it yourself. Like, you shouldn't intrinsically look at it and say it's true. You need to be skeptical. You need to ask a lot of questions. And Steve goes into a lot of those things just in terms of the trustworthy AI component. But we need to adopt that, and all of us parallelize that message, because if it's just a few of us talking, then, we just continue to perpetuate the problem.
Thank you very much. Yael?
So I'm Yael Ben-Susan. I'm the PI of the Voice DGP, and I'm also a clinician. I'm a surgeon, not nerdy, you see. I want to talk a little bit about sustainability and not just data. So my friends here are probably going to talk a lot about data sustainability. And I want to thank you for being here, for giving all your time and taking our pulse. And I think I want to give a little bit of a pulse. The sustainability of the consortium of the expertise. So I think I heard, it's amazing the work that you've done coming together. We heard that we need to break silos, right? Because right now it's hard to tell clinicians. But that didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It took about a year to even learn to work together. And you can put, documents on how to be a good team science. People don't learn to work together from documents, right? They learn I read all the documents, right? But there's time, right? You need time, and you need to build that collaboration. And we had to, clinicians had to teach engineers what our world, they had to teach us. And the team that we are today as a group, and the work that's been done is incredible. I get surprised every time I prepare a presentation to see how much we've accomplished, but the investment we put to accomplish that. And at the end of the year, at the end of the phase, I'm concerned that we're not putting enough attention in the sustainability of the consortium, just focusing on the sustainability of the data. I'm concerned that the data itself, I know that we're all trying to build something that can fly on its own without us. But the reality, it needs a little bit more sustainability of the consortium. It feels too short, especially we had the program revamped in the middle, right? So that took some time. So that's my concern.
Yeah, we've had many discussions about this. The Common Fund is a temporary sort of program, right? It's 5 to 10 years, number one. And we're now entering into phase 2, which you've heard about. I think you've probably listened to the Council of Councils presentation. And actually in that proposal, there is a sustainability component. Now, what that will look like, how we are planning to move forward is still, the devil's in the details, but we're working on that effort. That will result in NOFOs. We're not going to, this is an important endeavor for NIH AI. And, you are in some ways this community by virtue of being together for now almost 5 years, 4 years plus, have created, you are on the bleeding edge. You are doing the things that others will want to follow in your footsteps. So in that sense, you are the trailblazers that are going to continue to contribute and partner with the NIH moving forward. There's just no way around this. You've done so much. We work so closely with you. I see a path forward for us to continue this effort in some way. I mean, there's too much here, too much good work that's already happened to basically end it. So I see a lot of good things coming out of the next phase where there will be opportunities for this community to be engaged. So I'm really hopeful for the future and look forward to learning more from all of you as we move forward and in partnership with the NIH.
Thank you.
Can I give a fast answer that won't
Sure.
against the two?
Yes.
So, the beginning challenge was to create these AI-ready data sets, and everyone paid attention to that all around the country, and, very highly visible program, and you were successful. And so now kind of like the next challenge in phase space is how to make them sustainable, and that's not trivial. And certainly, we have our structure within the NIH requires us to make a compelling pitch to the leadership that, will get funding again. So just like you guys want to get funding, we want to get funding. And so, this is sort of our best shot. And you saw the response. There was unanimous approval by the Common Fund, the Council of Councils. And so, as Dave says, we can't imagine the success. The challenge is out there. The success is really up to you guys, your engagement, your participation. There are going to be NOFOs. They're going to be different from the other NOFOs, but they'll give you an opportunity to engage. So we depend on that partnership.
Thank you.
Yeah, may I just make one other comment in response? No, you don't have to stay there. But one of the, I remember last year at this meeting, we and a couple of folks on your team had what I thought was a really interesting conversation about teaming and data sharing. And that's something that, I've thought a lot about since then. And the premise of your question, I feel like, is based on that it takes time to build these collaborations. And honestly, from my perspective, I see a lot of collaborations that I think are mostly on paper. I mean, to be completely candid. And when we see collaborations that are truly teams working together that advance the field, I think that's something that really should be rewarded. And we've gone a lot further in terms of trying to come up with ways to reward data sharing, for one. And one of the other things that we've been thinking about is other ways to reward and metricize and incentivize teaming.
Yes.
Now, if you have thoughts about what specific aspects make a good team, please let's talk about that off. Well, I'm definitely all ears, because that's something that we at NIH are very interested in, because ultimately what we want to do is do the science that advances, the field and comes up with better treatments. So I thank you for asking about that.
Thank you. And I know Steve raised his hand, and Trey has a question, and 5 more people behind you. So Steve, briefly.
Look, all I'm to say about, and following up on what Mike said, is that the teaming, I think, is an enabling lever to create the culture change the community needs around all of this change in behavior around training, reproducibility, transparency.
Yeah.
It gets back to the trust issue. I mean, for AI to not be threatening and to be accepted and trusted by the public is going to need a whole change of standards in communicating about why you trust it and why this knowledge works for you in your case. And it's going to take teams like yours to lead that culture change and exemplify the new behavior. No one else can do it, right? The functional teams are the ones that are going to be trailblazers. So I think that's a measure of success that NIH can track as well. Over.
Thank you very much. Trey.
Hi, Trey Ideker, Functional Genomics Project at Bridge2AI. I was going to talk about multimodal data analysis, but I've been baited by Michael's nerd comment. So the nerds, I say, in my opinion, the nerds in your analogy are the engineers, and then we also have the medical establishment, as you mentioned, and there's a third set of stakeholders. It's very important, the scientists. And there's a reason why we have 3 national academies along those 3 lines. They're very different modes of thinking about the world. And in my lab and project, we've really been noting this as we interact with the tech companies who, arguably have built 99% of the AI we're talking about, and most recently the agentic AI systems. And there's a lot of companies and bold claims now being made that agents are going to just take over the scientific process, and a lot of excitement, right? I actually think the people who are going to do it are the biologists, are the scientists, as opposed to the engineers or the medical establishment. I think we're going to be the ones who build the AI overlord of all of science. And the reason is you get on the phone or the Zoom with the tech companies, and they're great people, and of course they're the ones pushing things right now. They don't know what a positive control is. And you learn this, you're like, oh my God. Right. And then you're spending, now they're hiring biologists, by the way. So that might be the other route to what happens here is Google may just hire enough clinicians and biologists that they take it over. And that's fine. But I think for now, there's a huge opportunity for the NIH for putting together these 3 establishments essentially under one funding body. So anyway, let me quickly squeeze in my original multimodal comment, which is,
That wasn't the question.
which is also something Michael said about the imaging in your example being the main source of information. And there's, of course, multiple levels of imaging when you build these multimodal foundation models. So in that case, for diagnostics, imaging was had 90% of the information, right? Now, I just want to point out that there may be other goals, and the reason they call these foundation multimodal models is they're generally applicable for many downstream applications. So if you're looking for novel therapeutics, it may be okay that the genetics don't necessarily carry more information, but they might carry the drug targets. Just wanted to point. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to share?
Trey, if I can respond, I loved your comments, and basically I think every single thing makes sense to me. I would only but something that Steve said on the computer screen triggered this thought that I think that there are a lot of questions to me. The more that I think about this, the more that I realize how we know what we know is based often on assumptions that were made decades ago. The reason doctors think the way that they do is that they were taught certain things in school, and those were based on randomized controlled trials that were done decades ago with endpoints that were chosen. And I hope that AI can give us a chance to take a deeper dive in terms of how do we know what we do, because I think in some ways that really gets at the premise of your question. And there's going to be a lot of trust and of the sort that Steve mentioned about that. And so I think this fascinates me.
Totally agreed.
Thank you. Eric?
I'm going to try not to react to your comment, Trey, but
I know. There's children in the room.
I'm a neurologist and an ICU doctor, and I happen to be a computational physiologist who's been studying signals for some time. So as a sort of hybrid nerd, I approach data sharing, sort of from a personal point of view, sort of in a missionary point of view, both for patients, who I see every day in the ICU and sort of need answers, and also as a researcher who in my young career faced colleagues who sort of took data and hid data and prevented me from doing the science that the patients actually needed. So we've become sort of missionaries for data sharing to the point that, in building this with colleagues, near petabyte data set of imaging and waveforms, we are trying to get it out to the public the best way we can. What we did when we developed the program was recognize this risk of re-identification was pretty high. And in the last couple of years, I didn't expect this, but we're now publishing maybe more law review journals articles than we are maybe medical journal reviews, just dedicating ourselves to data sharing. The challenge is that each of our projects have very different types of data and risks. So unlike a genomics data set, a real world data set isn't collected often with consent of patients. So in our construction of our project and the legal scholarship that sort of edified it through the ethics pillar, we've come to a strong conclusion that our data probably can't meet safe harbor. Because of that, we've tried to construct a concept of de-identification through expert determination, not by experts reviewing that our data is de-identified, but actually by putting it in a place where we audit it and make sure no one can re-identify it. That's our form of expert de-identification, is a trusted research environment. And we put resources into that so that people can do agentic query and all these amazing ways that now, over 400 people have registered and started to use this 100,000 patient data set. We're worried that in the next 6 months, as we try to craft a sustainability plan, that we'll need to go iteratively to our hospitals, 19 of them, 14 who deliver data, and ask them for HIPAA waivers to share that data if we wanted it to be made publicly available. And those people who want to use the data will need to get approval each episode of data sharing for the project specific need. We call this the minimal necessary use of the data under HIPAA. So the directed question is, how do we do that? The way we've approached it is by building more partnerships, public-private partnerships with industry and cloud service providers who are willing to sort of sustain our resource for the next 5 years and sort of committed financial resources to do that. With the state, in my state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who's offered a pretty low cost to help us host data. And we've sort of brought forward these ideas, but we know that if we're asked in written form to go to our hospitals and put it in a place where the data can be downloaded and it can't meet safe harbor, that we're going to be stuck between our institutions and the NIH in a place where we might not be able to win. So I think we want to win together. So I just want to ask the pointed question of sort of which of the strategies that we mentioned do you think is feasible?
Thank you, Eric. Brad?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. So full disclosure, right before we came here, we were having a conversation about exactly this. We know this is a concern. And I think where our team landed is we desperately want to have that conversation with the Bridge2AI PIs and the teams to understand how can we do this together as opposed to mandating a solution. I think we need to learn from you as well. We've had certain policies kind of pushed onto NIH as well that we have to be compliant with in terms of like the CATRs, the controlled access to the repositories. So I think iterating towards a solution together is going to be the right way. I don't think we have a fixed answer that we can give you today to say, please go to your 19 hospitals and make sure that you get those waivers. I think it's going to have to be an ongoing conversation, which is a very hand-wavy answer. I apologize.
That's the best answer we could possibly get.
Yeah, I truly don't see how we do this without.
We don't think we come with all the answers. And we understand that the EOs give you pressure, but they can't compel our hospital under law.
That's
so
right.
there's this existential tension that if we're not sort of coming up with a creative solution, it's going to be hard.
One of the things that was mentioned in our meeting just ahead of this is that these 4 grand challenges were intentionally selected because of the diversity of the data, the diversity of the spaces, of the verticals in which they were chosen. We expect to have 4 separate conversations around exactly this. How do we do this the right way? So not to overcommit this team. I don't know how much I'll be involved in all of that, but I do think it's important to identify that it's meant to be a conversation. It's the whole point was to figure this out.
Yeah, and I think the through line for all this is the issue of sustainability. This is not something that's going to happen over the next month or so, right? This is built into phase 2. It's something we need to keep considering. And the other key component of this is partnership. We're not a regulatory body. NIH does not regulate much, although that we leave that to other entities within the government. So we look at this as a partnership between NIH and the extramural community to figure this out, realizing that you are living the challenges that we need to better understand as NIH so we can help support the entire extramural community and how we share data better, manage the data, sustain it long term. So I look at this as just the beginning of a very deep conversation with everyone in this room and beyond to get this right over time.
Michael?
Eric, I think that, thank you for asking that and just for articulating what I suspect a lot of people are thinking. One thing that I've thought more and more is how this project is delving into what I would say is uncharted territory. Because there really haven't been a ton of data sets of this scope, with this sort of computational power, that have been produced before and that have been meant to be shared. I think that you mentioned one thing that was interesting is that, it's not, you feel in your assessment, it's not de-identified based on safe harbor. And to me that, I suspect you're correct. From our landscape here, we see a lot of variability in terms of how these issues are being dealt with, like in the community. And to me, that raised a lot of questions. Like how come all these things are true at the same time and all legal at the same time? And does that mean that, some of our rules are, need to be looked at a little bit more? And so I think that, the landscape is that there's a lot of, like, people are selling data, out there and, for quite a bit of money. And so I think that my point in saying this is, how there's sometimes a disconnect between the policy and the reality because policy lags. And I hope, and as David said, we're not in the policymaking business, but this community is the experts that can help hopefully inform. And I would love to see a world where policy is informed by real data and not created in a vacuum. And so I hope these are all going to be things that we can tie together to. And these are not issues that any of us on this podium can answer alone. But as you can imagine, we've had a lot of conversations with other people throughout, government about this. Super complicated, but future partnerships for sure in the spirit that Brad and David were saying. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to bring up a time check and just be cognizant of the fact that we've met our time. If I know that, well, it is through. So if it's in your generosity of time, be able to stay. I know that some of you have to rush back to other meetings. Then I would like to kindly ask you to stay to the 15:15, if that's okay. And if so, I know it's going to be heartbreaking, but after Pamela, I think we are going to stop the questions there. So Lucilla, if you're okay, bringing up your question, and then we share answers as fast as we can. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you standing there and you staying here. Please.
Well, thank you all. And I'll be brief. I think, and I invite everyone to attend the lunch work on the data sharing working group, because I think that will debate these things. And whoever said that we can't expect different results if we continue to do the same thing was correct, right? And this program is different. I've been in other common fund programs, and there was a lot of emphasis on centralizing the data and doing things in a particular way. And this program is different. It's for data sharing responsibly. There's got to be trust that, yes, the DGPs will share the data to the extent that the participants are on board on this. And if consents are needed, I mean, that all will require resources. I think that's pretty understood. I think what I would ask the committee is, are there thoughts of utilizing different strategies for distributed computing, federated learning, and again, how to do that, knowing that the GPU infrastructure is very limited and the security of different environments will also come into mind. So is there the thought that NIH will develop a highly secure GPU-enabled environment that then would justify more of centralization, perhaps not, or partner with institutions that do have those environments? Again, you don't make policy, but then also you don't need to overdo when it's not written into contracts and so on.
Steve. Oh, Steve. Sorry, Steve. They're calling for you to go first if you'd like.
I'm sorry. Yes. I think that I'm sorry, Lucille. I mean, I think the process here feels like a lot of the same work we were going through when GWAS data came out, 15 years ago. And how do we preserve privacy? How do we organize groups to work collaboratively around that? In some of the work that the principles that NIH surfaced at the time wasn't just around process and legal, but what's best for the patient and what engenders trust in the process. So transparency around who are the players, what are the governance articles, how can patients and contributors see themselves in the process and what's happening to the data, what are the questions being asked, what are the priorities of the project. And so I think Common Fund's done a great job in surfacing all of that. Now it's how do we operationalize that into these infrastructure systems? And so I think that's the transition that has to be captured in this reconfiguration or whatever the next step is going to be in continuing the program. Just looking at it from an operational point of view. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so going back to the partnership discussions, right? We are really interested in partnering with everybody here to try to find a good solution to this.
Absolutely.
Unlike the GWAS times, we are now in a world where technologies exist for federated machine learning and so on. So I wish this is where we're going to go in the future for having these discussions, like creating an environment that allows for federated distributed computing while preserving privacy and so on. We're making a lot of progress in that area. And that's what I hope NIH is going to basically try to build for the future infrastructure for AI and so on, which would also facilitate sharing of models, right? Everything that should be coming out of phase 2 would be facilitated by sharing the resources that we expect to see. So I think it's very exciting times if we're willing to work together on really take the best out of this amazing amount of resources while also preserving the privacy of participants. There are the tools to do it. We just need to explore them and implement them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pamela Foster, CM4AI, teaming core. So I'm asking the last teaming, yay. I'm asking the last question, really following up on the first question that was asked. The trainee talked about getting this information out to the community and the distrust that's there. So, the saying, if you build it, they will come, is not true. And we have a great model that can help kind of bridge that gap, and that's community health workers. I mean, we saw it work beautifully with COVID. And I think that NIH, I'm not sure if NIH is thinking about using community health workers to really disseminate information about. I think we need much more AI education in the community. And so NIH probably, I don't know if they partner with CDC, HRSA, Public Health Service, but the community health worker model is a great model for sort of bridging that gap of information dissemination.
Can I jump in here? So Pamela, thank you. I was literally on the phone yesterday with colleagues and CDC leadership to talk about how NIH can partner with CDC around state, local, and regional outreach on things like AI, information dissemination, et cetera. So I think you're pointed in exactly the right direction. This isn't an NIH only problem. This is something where we need to have those local, regional health outreach. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And one of the foundational aspects of a network that we organized during COVID, the Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center, or MIDRIC, was to help radiologists in emergency departments, deal with the overwhelming influx of patients all around the country who presented with, chest x-rays that were indeterminate. What is the diagnosis? What is the prognosis? How do we actually manage treatment? And so that network has grown to multiple universities, hospitals, at leading academic medical centers, but partnerships with community hospitals in small communities all around the country with professional societies, all designed to develop algorithms that, are in leading centers that are really wealthy and try to sort of extract the best knowledge generation from those places with partnerships from small community hospitals and practitioners and so forth to send those algorithms out so that they, they move at the speed of electrons, so they can be distributed very quickly everywhere. And so there are stakeholders now in the MIDRIC network that are all around the country, not just the cutting edge, high compute power academic medical centers. So those partnerships in the development of algorithms that can happen in highly resourced places like yours that can then move very, very quickly that's a very powerful, we're doing that in different programs, and I think we can extend it to all of these databases.
Pamela, there. I think that you asked a great question, and that's something that we don't want to be viewed as an ivory tower, because what we do is we do research that is supposed to help, everybody in the country. And there's a program, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware. And so number one, this is, thank you. I think that there's a program, Care for Health, that's basically, it's administered through the Common Fund. And it's basically a rural primary care research network. And my understanding is that there's a hub that's at UAB. And that may be one area to talk. They're always looking for, now and then they're, And the question is, how do you disseminate clinical research into real primary care clinics? And something like this, that just may be one area to look into.
Thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us, to be intentional. Thank you for being here too, Steve, even if you couldn't travel. This has been very insightful. We have learned a lot about the vision that you have, and we just want to say thanks for taking the time to spend this morning with us. So I'd like to invite everybody to give them a big round of applause. As we move into the next part of our all hands meeting and the next part of our work, I hope that this conversation this morning serves as an inspiration. So thank you so much. We'd like to get a picture with you before you leave. Everyone, we have a break. We are going to stay on break until 40 minutes past the hour. So it's 10:15 right now. So see you at 10:40. And you can go to the end for drinks. There's food on the poster session, and we'll reconvene here in about 25 minutes or so. Thank you very much. Yes, we can get Steve in the picture too. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I think if we come down in the front, that'll work.
Sorry, I couldn't be there, guys.
Let's move this way, and then we'll go over here by the podium. Yeah, we can do it over here by the podium. Christian, how about we organize everyone here? Okay. Oh, because we have Steve. This is true.
Yeah.
Photograph. Okay. Let me.
Yeah, I'll be next to you.
No, this is. Yeah, that would be great. So.
I think you are gonna stick around for a few more days, right?
It's 2 months.
2 months, I thought one.
Got it.
I heard you had an.
Yeah, that's away for like a.
Maybe we can.
Can we just take the pictures?
I'm so intrigued by the pictures out here. I could just hold the laptop with Steve's face on it.
Yeah. It just sends you a picture. Just Photoshop it
Can you
in.
hear us? Can you hear us? We're trying to get organized.
Steve on it. If that, no, truly, if that's better,
Yeah,
like we can full
actually.
screen Steve and then I can just hold it
I'm gonna do that.
and then we can take the picture.
Steve's
where-
on 10 screens.
I know.
With every laptop.
Steve is everywhere. There we go.
All
That's what
10
I'm,
front.
see,
Good.
Some of that.
so we can like hold Steve.
You come to the front, yeah.
Feel like Sheldon in Big Bang.
But it's.
That's creative, yeah.
That's crazy.
So you go to the front.
No, we go together. Yeah. Wait, we go together. I can say.
Yeah, I mean, you're a neurologist. Hold on,
Perfect. Perfect. Because we all see you. Yeah, I just really want to.
Bye, Steve.
All right, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you.